Professor Joseph Syracusa, Professor Paul Battersby, Dr. Aidan Warren, special guests, contributors to the Melbourne Globalists, student and staff from the RMIT Bachelor of Arts, ladies and gentlemen. As the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the Melbourne Globalist, and on behalf of the RMIT Bachelor of Arts program, good evening, and welcome to Julian Assange International Enigma. Before we begin, allow me to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, original custodians of this land. Tonight, thanks to the generosity of RMIT and the tireless hard work of the Melbourne Globalist and our supporters, we have the opportunity to present to you the opportunity to personally put questions to a man who has redefined international relations in the modern age. A man who has nearly single-handedly challenged governments, uncovered secrets, and redefined, for better or worse, the lives of many, and who is now campaigning to bring those same revolutionary changes to our humble little state of Victoria in the current federal election. The Melbourne Globalist is proud to have a part in facilitating this discussion, and in doing so, fulfil our goal to provide young people with an avenue to connect with the world of international politics, to gain professional journalistic experience, and in doing so, fulfil our mantra of writing the world. For those who would like to connect to our discussion online through Twitter, please use our hashtag #QandAssange, and make sure to avoid the ever-popular hashtag Q&A. Though I expect Q&A quality responses from Mr. Assange for tonight, I'm not as devilishly handsome as Tony Jones, and no one's question will be politely ignored with the phrase, "I'll take that" as a comment. So without further ado, let me thank again RMIT for their kind generosity, and thank the Melbourne Globalist contributors for their work, especially our friends and associates Meg Loughnane, Ryan Lim, and others for their personal hard work, and invite Professor Joseph Syracusa to the stage. Thank you.
Good evening. It's a great pleasure. This is an event. When I was a young man, I walked into a seminar at the University of Denver, and there was sitting at the table was Martin Luther King. He said to us at the beginning of his talk, he said, quoted Victor Hugo. He said, "There's nothing more important than a time and an idea whose time has come." And this discussion about information and who controls it is a very important information, a very, very important discussion. And I was struck tonight by the timing. As Mr. Assange is in Britain, and Bradley Manning got 35 years for releasing information which the American public has a right to know. When I was a kid, William Kelly killed 500 people at My Lai and got 3.5 years home detention as his punishment. Down the road, Bradley Manning gets 35 years for releasing information which in his conscience. Manning has the support, of course, of all the people who supported the Pentagon Papers and an entire generation that fought for this privilege to who controls the information. So you're going to remember this night the same way I remembered our evening with Martin Luther King, because it's called hypermnesia. It's something that just sticks in your head for the rest of your life. And you'll be drawing on this for a long time. It's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege for RMIT to help host this. And now I'm supposed to invite L. Watson. Okay.
Well, thank you, Joe, first of all, and good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many people here. Don't know if we expected that, so that's great. My name is Eloise Watson, and I'm an honours student at the RMIT International Studies program. And on behalf of the Bachelor of International Studies and Global Studies, I'd like to welcome you all tonight to this event, which will feature a live interactive broadcast of Julian Assange from the Ecuadorian Embassy in the UK. So I began international studies 4 years ago, and I've been bombarded with information on subjects ever since, as diverse yet important as diplomacy, terrorism, the global political economy. And my 3 years of international studies culminated in an internship last year in New York at the United Nations. And I have no doubt that my pathway to that internship was really assisted by what has been instilled in me at RMIT, and that is a solid understanding of intercultural and political issues and processes. In particular, the international studies degree places a lot of emphasis on globalisation and the ramifications of globalisation. So given the very global nature of and global impact of the WikiLeaks event, the link between the International Studies RMIT course and our event tonight is a logical one. Indeed, as many of you know, the Julian Assange WikiLeaks event sparked debate around the world regarding a number of issues which have an international relations context. Now, just to summarise a few of those issues. Firstly, there is the subject of international law and the exercise of extradition. The power of the internet and the media is obviously another integral issue that came up with the WikiLeaks phenomenon. Government secrecy is another issue. Some have hailed WikiLeaks because they welcome any attempt to, pierce the wall of secrecy that surrounds so much of foreign policy making in today's world. But should states have secret information? Should governments have rights to censor certain material? Some say yes, and they contest the legality and the morality of releasing such secret governmental information. Perhaps most significant, though, from an international relations viewpoint, is what the WikiLeaks phenomenon reflected about the nature of the role of the US in today's 21st century. Did it highlight the downhill trajectory of a declining superpower, or did it alternatively confirm America's continued global leadership in geopolitical affairs today? So on that note, I'll now introduce Paul Battersby, who is Associate Professor and Discipline Head of RMIT Global Studies.
Well, thank you, everybody, and good evening. I am the Master of Ceremonies of sorts this evening, and I shall do my best not to stumble and stutter through the event and spoil the event for everybody still. But first, I have a few words that I'd like to say about Julian Assange by way of introduction. We're going to crack the world open and let it flower into something new, declared Julian Assange. This is quoted in Denver Nix's recent study, Private Bradley Manning, WikiLeaks and the biggest exposure of official secrets in American history. Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks organization have shone a very bright light into some very dark spaces to illuminate systematic unlawfulness and systemic hypocrisy in the world of politics and international relations, where clearly deception is the norm and trust is a wasting asset. But we always knew that governments lied or massaged the truth. After all, that's why governments hire spies, isn't it? Because governments refuse to trust each other or can't find a way to trust each other. That is why in democratic societies we have whistleblower protection laws, because we accept that there are occasions when unconscionable behaviour by a government or an organisation, of any nature for that matter, gives insiders a right and the duty to speak out and to disobey orders. It is often said in defence of government and police surveillance that if you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to fear. Assange's pursuit of radical transparency implies a similar view. But in this digital networked age, one cannot be so sure that absolute openness will necessarily yield a purer form of democracy. Indeed, we might assert a somewhat paranoid counter-argument that once we have nowhere left to hide, perhaps then we have everything to fear. After all, no one is perfect, and even in a democratic society, words and ideas can get you into trouble. There can be no absolute guarantees that all officials, in whatever capacity, are free from duress, prejudice, or malice. To give such a guarantee would be to deny that people can be human. And if I remember correctly, we invaded a certain Middle Eastern country on the basis of flimsy and some would say fabricated evidence. So maybe the WikiLeaks organisation that Julian Assange either created, pioneered, or led as an editor-in-chief has some functional validity. In the same way that state espionage aids the monitoring of international behaviour in a highly risk-sensitive and secretive global world, WikiLeaks perhaps provides a check on the abuse of power. But it has also made those in power more abusive, which perhaps puts everybody at risk. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Queensland, educated to university level, Julian Assange has demonstrated at a very early age an aptitude for cracking cyber systems. He was charged with hacking into Nortel and the Pentagon at the age of 24 back in 1995, and this was merely a dress rehearsal for what followed. Tonight, Julian Assange is a fugitive, given sanctuary in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, condemned by his critics as a terrorist. He is accused of placing the lives of US service personnel and civilians in jeopardy in Afghanistan and Iraq, although it should be said there is no evidence by the United States State Department's own admission that leaked diplomatic documents sourced from Private Bradley Manning has led to the death of a single US citizen. Enemies say he is guilty of violating the United States Espionage Act and should be tried for his crimes. Should this come to pass, one would have to question how fair such a trial could possibly be. Whatever your views on Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, political obligation, Bradley Manning, Edward Snowden, or the phantom prism, in this space, tonight at least, the rule of law will be observed and fundamentals of free speech will be upheld. Our conversation with Julian Assange will be guided by questions submitted in advance by members of the audience. And for the first half of the next hour at least, I will call upon audience members to ask their prepared questions in order, with a minimal intervention or interference from me. This will not be Q&A style in the sense that I won't be following Tony Jones's lead and interjecting whenever I see fit. I'll be allowing the audience to speak to Julian Assange, and my role will be facilitator only. If we have time, I will open the floor to questions without notice. Could I ask that if you are going to ask a question without notice, you do so by raising your hand? And could I ask that everybody resist the temptation to simply make public statements? Unsolicited interjections will, needless to say, result in summary and immediate ejection from the auditorium. So our questions tonight are arranged in themes. The first theme, which will focus on the WikiLeaks party, and obviously the developments of today will be focusing our minds and hopefully concentrating the mind of Julian Assange as he gives us an answer as to what exactly is happening in the WikiLeaks party today. Then we will explore issues of secrecy and censorship, and finally there'll be questions about Julian Assange, the person himself. So, if I can, I think we're a little bit ahead of time, introduce us to Julian Assange, or welcome Julian Assange. Welcome Julian Assange. Hello, how are you? Can you hear me?
I'm well, thank you. Can you hear me, Melbourne?
Yes, we can. Very much welcome.
I am a bit unhappy that you pronounced that Barack Obama slogan first off upon greeting me.
Just before we start,
it was stolen. That slogan was actually stolen from Latin America, where there has been an extremely interesting political rise of Latin American independence.
Thank you. Before we launch into this evening's questions, just a personal question. Flat 3B in Hans Crescent, London. It's a long way from Horseshoe Bay. Where do you think you'd rather be? I know it's a strange question, but I actually do remember living in Townsville for some time, and I know that you were born in Townsville. Probably not the question you were expecting.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question. The audio here was a bit muddy.
Maybe we'll just move on with this evening's proceedings. That was an attempt to launch into some light-hearted banter before we got into more serious business, which failed miserably, I'm afraid. So I do apologise. Right, our first question from the audience, and I've got to make sure I've got my questions in the right order. Samuel Baker. Could I call upon Samuel Baker, please, to ask our first question? Samuel? Thank you.
Here we go.
Yes. Good day to you. Censorship remains an issue in Australia in relation to video games. Despite having an 18 and over adults only rating, the Australian Classification Board continues to refuse some games for release. How would the WikiLeaks party address this?
What would you like? Is seriously, Samuel Beckett, was that right? Did I hear right?
Samuel Baker, sorry? Samuel Baker. If only Beckett.
Okay, video games. Okay, so as a general principle, states should not interfere in the behavior of a family. In relation to children and their consumption of communication, that must be primarily a responsibility for parents. But we do accept a regulation of business and business practices and what sort of businesses we want to encourage in our societies and what sort of businesses we want to discourage. Particular mechanisms of business. We see that in, you can't buy a bottle of pills which say they will cure cancer, for example. So we accept that regulation of business practice. That must be kept very separate from the regulation of our communications with each other, our individual desires to educate each other, publish and share with each other our creative works. The question as to whether video games need to be more regulated or less regulated in their sale in Australia as an empirical question. And the question is that a product that really is likely to harm people in a serious manner, or is it not? And then, having answered that question empirically, is it possible to actually regulate, given that you can buy computer games all over the world on the internet? Is it actually meaningful to even talk about regulating it? So that's the approach that we would look at it to try and answer the empirical question, where possible, try and not regulate communication, and then see whether there's actually any point at all in even trying to regulate the sale.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving right on to our next question, Edward Moy.
How will the WikiLeaks party, as a single issue party that is quoted as attempting to be apolitical, decide on how to vote on the myriad of issues that pass through the parliament if elected?
So, of course, we're not a single-issue party. Our issue is the issue of how to regulate our society and civilization, how to produce the best results from government, and we believe the best way to do that is through accountability and transparency. That's the way you produce a just government. That's the way you produce a free society. The quote about apolitical, of course, we never said this, or at least I never said this. Almost everything people do is political in some sense, and a political party is for sure political. We're not a party that's simply of the right or of the left. Rather, in terms of that political spectrum, we represent a very interesting phenomenon that has been encouraged by increased communication and education, which is the distillation of common trends and common threads in the classically right and the left that have a certain magnetism for each other, that draw each other together. And those are, if we look at the best classical descriptions of what comes out of the left, the will to justice. The description of what comes out of the right, that's the will for freedom. And both of these phenomena are, in essence, about power. In the left, they would say that, well, inequalities in power are unjust, and I agree. They are often a source of injustice. And on the right, we would say that inequalities, coercive power, lead to a lack of freedom. And both of these descriptions are correct. That where you have significant inequality in economic power, significant inequality in access to the mechanisms of the state or of the law, the result is injustice and the lack of freedom. Similarly, where you're not able to defend yourself against encroachment by the state or other powerful groups, because they have so much power, the result is a lack of freedom, and the result is a lack of justice. And these shared views are coming together as a result of the internet, and our work is a representation of those shared views. And it's quite a difficult process, and I suppose some of you might have seen last week how what a difficult process that is, to pull together a combined middle ground that is not the sort of extreme centre that we're seeing with the coupling together of the Australian Labor Party and the coalition in all principal important aspects, but is in fact the new centre, a rival centre of interpretation of the best right.
Thank you. And a question which goes very much to today's events. If I could call upon Chris Ledgeham, please. Thank you.
Hi. With Leslie Cannon's resignation from the WikiLeaks party and her Senate candidacy in Victoria due to what she described as a secretive alternative power centre in the party, what will happen if you are elected in Victoria? And furthermore, how do you propose to fix this secrecy and lack of transparency in your party, the party of standing against those very things?
Well, I mean, what can I say to that? Well, what secretive alternative power centre? It is nonsense on stilts. If it had any substance to it, we would actually see some description. In fact, if you read Leslie's description, she says that some member called some volunteer who told her something or other. This was never discussed with me in any manner whatsoever by Leslie Cannon or by, in fact, any other person. So that's the degree. It just isn't there. In relation to why these sorts of things happen, well, you know, I consider it essentially a matter of over-delegation, in that I have, for the past 2 months, made a conscious decision to prioritise saving a young man's life, Edward Snowden, and obtaining his asylum. We legal reasons what I say, but we had people accompanying him out of Hong Kong, and we were deeply involved in his asylum process in Russia, which we achieved. And we still have people protecting their rights there at this moment. That was a matter of international importance, importance not only to this young man's life, but a matter of international diplomacy, to the degree that, as we have seen, Barack Obama has cancelled his meeting with Putin and said is going off to Sweden. It's a matter that led to the downing of President Morales' jet. It's a matter that led to the force on France, Portugal and Spain to deny airspace to President Morales. It's a matter that led to Barack Obama making a press conference about it Friday before last to say what he was going to try and do about these surveillance regulations. It's a matter that has led to the detention date of David Miranda, a partner of a friend of mine, Glenn Greenwald, going through Heathrow, detained under counter-terrorism legislation, held by 9 hours, interrogated, denied a lawyer, on the Guardian newspaper here, and by Secret Service agents, and the destruction of 2 projects. So that's the sort of the cut and thrust of this thing going on, and I haven't even mentioned what is happening in South America. But it has importance for the entire Western civilization, in fact the entire world, and Australia's place in that world. Every single one of you in this audience has been intercepted by that surveillance system because you've used Microsoft computers, you've used Apple computers, you've used Google, Gmail, YouTube, who've all done secret deals with the National Security Agency, which have been revealed and confirmed as a result of this work. The Australian government is completely in bed with the system of the Five Eyes alliance. Okay, so as a result, I only attended 2 out of the past 11 National Council meetings, and so different groups ended up with different views, and ended up going over in some way, and see the results. But 6 out of the 7 candidates all still going strong. It's a matter that concerns President Arnold, no one else. We plan ahead, so of course I have another running mate. In fact, someone who I'd prefer to see in the Senate, to Leslie Cannon before these matters develop. That's Dr. Binoy Tamak. I believe he's here in the audience now. If you're there, Binoy, can you stand up? Yes. Okay. Yes. Probably known to some of you, an expert in international relations, highly educated, diverse background, great guy to be my running mate, and not a quitter.
Thank you, Jude. I just might actually take over the mantle of Tony Johns for a second and just ask a follow-up question. I think for people here in the audience, we're very keen to learn how WikiLeaks is going to turn the bad publicity around. There's a lot of publicity being generated by the resignations from your National Council. What steps are going to be taken, and indeed, is it in your hands, or is it really up to the people here in Australia, like our friend Binoy, to resolve this problem?
Well, I mean, it resolved itself. It resolved itself in a rather pleasant way, which was, although I appreciate, and I do actually mean that, appreciate the contribution and valuable of some of those people in the National Council. They were also a source of considerable in the National Council. So I'm quite pleased, actually, that after that preferences error in New South Wales, where those people on the National Council pushed against my advice for me to have final oversight of those preferences. They have I accept their resignations. I think it's the right thing to do, and I think with their resignations we can move on. We have an election to win. In relation to the publicity, well, you know, when you're a minor party, just 2.5 weeks before the election, and suddenly all the press want to speak to you, it's not a bad thing. We've gotten a lot of free publicity that we wouldn't have otherwise got. Of course, it has a particular angle, but at least people are interested and looking up what we've been doing. And if you go to the website, we released a formal statement. And so I'm quite confident about the details and happy with the details. Have a look at the website yourself, wikileaksparty.org.au.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. That's a comprehensive answer. Thank you very much indeed. We'll move on to our next question then, please. William Stoltz.
Good evening. As you mentioned, we are 2 weeks away from the election, and in the interests of democratic transparency, Mr. Assange, when will you identify the individual who will stand in your stead if you are elected to the Senate but unable to take your seat due to your confinement?
I just did. Binoy, Dr. Binoy Cannon, in the front row, stand up again, show them your face.
Thank you for a succinct answer.
Well, there we are. There's a question resolved. Right, now we're going to move on to our second set of questions, which deals with WikiLeaks and secrets and censorship. Could I call upon Mary Recita, please, to ask your question? Mary, are you in the audience? Thank you.
Good evening. In relation to secrets, censorship, and surveillance, do you defend WikiLeaks on behalf of a good journalism or in the name of public justice? Thank you.
Great question. You see, I don't see a difference between these two. Good journalism must be accurate, first of all, but within accuracy, there's a whole world to choose from. There's a vast amount of facts and information to choose. So what do you spend your time on? Now this decision, selectivity, sorry, there's a bit of noise behind that. This selection, this involvement of the journalistic process in selectivity gives an enormous freedom to individual journalists and editors. What do they select within being accurate? And, well, your selections are guided by what? They're guided by a desire to do justice, or they're guided by a desire to make money, or they're guided by a desire to make a name for yourself, or they're guided by a desire to pump up the political connections of the publishing organisation. That's what is going on in all media organisations. So when you hear a journalist say, "Oh, they're completely independent of any concern about justice," well, they're involved in one of these other four concerns: making money, pumping up the political concerns of their publisher, or profitability, or pumping up their own personal reputation. So journalists who don't want to do justice, well, what can we worry about them?
Thank you. Right, now we have a quadruple-barreled question from two people asking the next question, Charles Cheer and Alexandra Eves. This is the combined question.
Hi. Do you consider hacktivists as an ethical form of investigative journalism? And if so, what gives you the right to decide where the line is drawn on what the public should or shouldn't know? Do you consider hacktivists as an ethical form of investigative journalism? And if so, what gives you the right to decide where the line is drawn on what the public should or shouldn't know?
Right, well, hacktivists. Well, there's some great hacktivists, that's clear. In terms of us as a publishing organisation, well, the most developed law on this historically has been the United States. Of course, the US has sort of fallen into some abyss the past few years, but if we go back before that and look at what the development of the law was, it is that a publishing organisation or a journalist communicating to the public is separate from however information was obtained. So in the long process of the flow of information, however it got to a journalist, from how the journalist, from the journalist publication. Now, the United States, of course, has tried to destroy that precedent in the past few years by saying that if information was obtained by a whistleblower or government employee, classified, then the journalist and the publishing organisation is called an espionage. And that's the accusation against us. That's the grand jury case in the United States. For the actual hacking into computers and getting information, well, it's a balance, right? Of course, we can't simply have people hacking into our computers, violating our personal privacy and so on. But when you talk about a government that is committing some form of abuse, or a corporation that is committing some form of abuse, or even an individual that is committing very serious abuse, although that's rare, then it's a balancing test in the end. Now, what gives WikiLeaks the right to make a decision about what to publish and what to not publish? Well, there's two perspectives on this. First of all, someone's got to do it, and we have the best record how to do it. Not a single person has been harmed by our publications, and we've achieved great change as a result. So that proof of experience shows that we have the capacity and we have the judgment to do it, and in fact, that's why the public supports us. Then take a more philosophical approach and say the way that powers are divided is such that we live in a free society, or we should, and the real basis for our whole society, for every law, every constitution, every regulation, is the communication of information, and that's expressed perhaps best in the US Amendment, where it doesn't say that Congress shall make a law to regulate the press and provide the protections, or provide protections to the freedom of speech between people. It says that the Congress shall make no law. In other words, it takes the communication of people outside the legislative system, and that is correct, because it is the communications of all of us between each other that is the regulator of the legislative system, of judiciary, of constitutions, of everything. And so that basic communication between people must, to some extent, reside in a place that is above simple regulation. Functions in society. So, while of course police investigating the mafia should keep their investigation secret for a period of time, similarly, investigative journalists and bold publishers like WikiLeaks have the responsibility, the primary responsibility, to assist their sources in the same way that the lawyers represent their clients. We represent whistleblowers, the court of public opinion, in the same way that lawyers represent their clients to court. And everyone needs representation, and it's our role to do that. And our role to do that should not be interfered with. And it may compete occasionally with the roles of other organizations, but that's okay. In a free society, we have different organizations with different roles who are in competition.
Thank you. And there's a second part to that question too from Alexandra. No? No? Oh, right, okay. My notes. Very well then. Could I please call upon Eloise Watson to ask our next question? Thank you.
Are there any circumstances where it is necessary to shield information from the public to ensure their protection?
Yeah, sure. But the question is who is doing the shielding now, and who has the responsibility, and who can be trusted to do that? And what is the accountability so that so-called shielding is not abused? Because we see, in fact, nearly every problem that comes out of government is as a result of its secrecy. Secrecy means that unjust plans can be developed and flourish. Secrecy means that abuses are covered up. Secrecy means that the incompetent can thrive and be promoted. WikiLeaks is an organization that has at its heart, yes, fearless, bold publishing, protecting the historical records and interference and so on. But on the other hand, we also have at our heart protecting the identity of our sources, protecting our staff through secrecy. Now, we are not a government. We do not have coercive power over people. We're not a state. So the obligations in relation to us are less. So we accept that police properly investigating crimes, of course, their operations must, for a limited period of time, be secret, just like we must protect the secrecy of our
Thank you. Our next question is from Al Meredith.
Good evening, Mr. Assange. As a duty of care toward Bradley Manning, did you feel any responsibility in outlining the legal repercussions he was to face prior to his handing over the information to WikiLeaks?
Well, we can't talk about any alleged communications with sources for obvious reasons, but on the WikiLeaks website we document laws from every country and have done for years in quite a lot of detail.
Let's see. You wouldn't care to elaborate a little bit upon that point, Mr. Assange? No.
We explain laws, we explain all the pitfalls, one or another, how to protect yourself. We do all that. You may note in the alleged conversation, which Bradley Manning admits to, between himself and the US informer who helped him, apparently. He says that by having that conversation, he was breaking WikiLeaks offset or WikiLeaks operational security, that he is breaking our rules in having such a conversation. And so if that conversation was true, it lets you understand something about the process which may have led to Bradley Manning's eventual arrest.
Thank you very much indeed for that clarification. If we can move on to our next question, please, from Christopher Weinberg. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Assange. On balance, has Barack Obama's presidency been a success on issues related to accountability or transparency, or a continuation or worsening of the conditions during the Bush years?
Thanks. It has been an absolute disaster. Barack Obama's presidency, although of course the systemic tendencies were already there, is propelling the United States into the it's a very, very serious problem. I'm not of the view that Barack Obama is sort of leading the charge, if you like. My view is that the United States is a very large and complex society with very powerful organizations in it and industrial bodies, and that the president in some ways is always like a cork that is being buffed by the waves on the ocean, one way or another. But it's clear, at least in the past 2 years, that Barack Obama now feels that he's not simply a spokesperson that represents those forces and that he balances those forces, but that he feels personally that he is now inside that system, that he is part of it. And we can see that in the impotent rage expressed over the Edward Snowden affair, which was quite destructive to US diplomatic relationships, showed them to be ineffectual, made them enemies by condemning China multiple times, by attacking Putin, by attacking Venezuela, by attacking Bolivia, by downing the president's jet, and so on. These sorts of moves don't assist the United States. It looks weak and like a country that you can't deal with. So what are they? Well, they're a type of signaling, a type of domestic signaling, not international signaling, that we see when we examine North Korea, for example. In the North Korean case, why do the North Koreans keep making those insane-sounding statements constantly? I mean, surely they don't think that's a good PR tactic for dealing with the rest. Why do they do it? I mean, what drives them to act in such an insane manner? North Koreans are not stupid, they're smart people. But this is about domestic signaling. This is about the military communicating with the political establishment, or trying to gather forces around it by creating external conflict and so on. And so what we see in the White House's response to Rose's asylum and the National Security Agency is it saying, we feel your pain. We're right there with you. We're right there with you, National Security Agency and associated organizations. We are part of your family. And look how hard we're trying. We're spraying out extradition requests here and there. We're seizing people. We're denouncing people. We're attacking them. See, even though that is counterproductive and reduces US power. Now, there's figures. The United States now has a state within a state. The number of people involved in the sharing classified information who have been through a classification process, who have security clearances, who have been inducted into a new system of law, because there's a whole lot of laws that surround people who have security clearances, have been inducted into a new world, because our societies are defined by our information flows. And within the classified system, there is a unique information flow. That now reaches 5.5 million people. The population of New Zealand is inside the United States, a state within a state. A state within a state, of course, each person there has 10 family members or so, very close people to them. So there's something like 50 to 100 million people who are directly connected in the United States into that system. That has risen dramatically. Before Barack Obama got in, it was something like 2.8 million people, now up to 5.5. Top secret security clearances now stand at least 1.2 million top secret security clearances, up from about 500, 600,000. The majority of those top secret security clearances, who are they held by? They're held by companies like Booz Allen Hamilton. They're held by companies like Northrop. They're held by companies like Lockheed Martin. They're held by companies like Google. So in fact, the closer you get to the center of secrecy, the more you end up into the private military and intelligence contractors that now do the majority of the work. National Security Agency, 80% of its budget goes to these private contractors who form an assembly of this state within a state. A remarkable, incredible system. And perhaps one way you can read a book produced just 2 years ago by Diana Priest, Washington Post journalist, an establishment journalist, on the development and rise of that system. It's quite Kafkaesque because of the compartmentalization of these top secret security clearances. No one can see the whole thing. No one person. There's secret programs and laundering and cash flows and exchanges between people. It is a marauding morass that is disconnected from itself, from any oversight, even internally. It is like a sort of military-industrial cancer or a lung infection, mindless, but growing.
Could I ask Henry Hamilton, please, to ask the next question?
Do you think that governments have simply buried their secrets more deeply as a result of WikiLeaks' actions?
Well, we looked at this a long time ago. In fact, back in 2006, I wrote an email to friends sort of looking at the issues. Well, if we expose them this way and this way, won't they just take everything off paper? Well, when we published the main manuals for Guantanamo Bay, and we've published 4 of them now, no other organisation, no human rights group, no other press organisation has published even one. We've published 4. Those manuals, yeah, they describe incredibly abusive treatment and torturous treatment and so on. But they also describe and instruct the guards there to falsify records for when the Red Cross comes to visit, and the Red Cross has a function in assessing prisoners. They don't publish their findings, they just tell the government concerned. That on paper, why would you be so stupid as to put that on paper in a manual that goes to 1,000 guards at Guantanamo Bay? Well, because they won't do what they're told otherwise. In order to have systematic injustice, you have to systematize. In order to systematize, you have to make clear instructions to particular groups of people. To make it clear, you can't just do it orally, otherwise everything decays into Chinese whispers. So that means that either organizations, when they are faced with WikiLeaks-style disclosures, they can either start taking things off paper, in which case they can't systematize the injustices they have, and therefore must be usually always at a small scale, or they have to act in such a way that when their systematization is revealed, it doesn't backfire on them. So I think that's quite a good pressure to occur. Of course, the State Department and US military are trying all sorts of ways to get around this, but it doesn't seem very successful so far.
Jonathan Horsler, for the next question, please.
Is there any state-held information that you would draw the line at revealing in the interests of global security? In other words, are any state-held secrets sacrosanct, i.e. nuclear codes, locations of nuclear missiles, the details and locations of clandestine officials? And if there is a line in the sand that you would draw, as you've already alluded to tonight, where is that line?
Well, unlike every other media organization in the world, we have a clearly stated editorial criteria. This is similar to like the conditions under which a barrister will represent you in court. That having once signed on to your case is meant to argue your case before the public. So our criteria is that the information must be of diplomatic, political, ethical or historical significance, not published before, be under some kind of sensitive threat, whether that's someone being fired or whether that's being prosecuted for espionage or some other kind of threat. And within that, we promise, within our available resources, to publish it as soon as possible and as much as possible. So what do I mean by as much as possible? Well, what I mean is that we will sometimes retard, delay publication of certain parts for a certain amount of time. Now, that's for harm minimization purposes, so you might withhold a name, for example, of someone who would be likely to subject to unjust execution. We have done that completely successfully so far. Not a single person has been that anyone alleges as a result of our publications. And that's really quite a remarkable achievement. Let's compare that to the Ford Motor Company and other organizations who do things at scale. We publish an average 5,000 documents every day. Organizations that do things at scale. Ford Motor Company. How many people have been killed by Fords? Similarly, bricks. Bricks are produced at scale. How many people have been killed by bricks? Similarly, the BBC started plenty of riots and all sorts of things with information that WikiLeaks so far, of course it won't last forever, but so far we have a perfect record in two respects. We have a perfect record, not a single person been physically harmed as a result of our disclosures, and we have a perfect record in never having got it wrong about the legitimacy of the document.
Thank you. Ray Lawrence.
Do you think your war on government secrecy and surveillance can be definitively won? If so, how?
Well, you know, a complex human society, nothing is definitive apart from the struggle itself. But how much ground do you give, how much ground do you gain? Of course, people always will try and use secrecy to cover up overt plans that may be exposed. But we've made significant inroads into that, and I am proud of that. And it's something that's not realized. You know, as time goes by, if you're not following a phenomenon, you don't actually see its development. But back when we started WikiLeaks, the view that you would do the sort of things that we are doing at all wasn't there. There was no acceptance. And gradually we increased the intensity of our publications. And we widened the envelope for the press as a whole. We shifted that ground. We made new ground that other publishers can walk into, that all of you, to a degree, can now walk into. This increasing perception that people can communicate freely and publish freely.
Thank you. Look, we're moving on, making very good time indeed. We're moving on to our final section of formal questions, Mr. Assange, and this is titled Julian Assange, the man himself. So prepare yourself for some more searching questions. Could I ask Leonard Krasny, please, to ask the first question? Thank you.
Hi, Julian. Do you have any solid evidence that Sweden will extradite you to the US?
Yeah, well, interesting way to phrase the question, of course. My situation here is like you. I have not been charged with an offence. Not in England, not in Sweden. Unlike you, I have been detained for 3 years. 10 days under house arrest, about 580 days, 10 days in solitary confinement, about 580 days under house arrest, and over 400 days in this embassy. The Ecuadorian government has asked the Swedish government to do 2 things. My lawyers have asked them as well, and they're quite simple. Behave like they do in other cases and come to the United Kingdom if they want to speak to me, pick up the phone or accept an affidavit. Or, alternatively, make a diplomatic guarantee, which is done in other cases, that I will not be extradited to the United States if I go to Sweden. I refuse to do that. Now, in relation to evidence, okay, well, the US grand jury is a really significant phenomenon. Millions and millions of dollars have been spent on that. The investigation into us is continuing. It was the front page, the news story in the New York Times in June, the investigation into me and to my organization and staff. The fact that those criminal proceedings continue. And yet you hear people like Bob Carr just outright lie about that issue. That's well known. You can go to usvwikileaks.org, which has thousands of documents from related cases. People have been subpoenaed. My friends have been sucked into the US, coercively forced to testify. Our people have been detained at airports by FBI officers waiting for them. Even my Australian lawyer, Jennifer Robinson, on the way out of the UK, was held briefly. And Virgin Airlines admitted that was on request of the security services. The US Department of Justice, and this is my favorite thing actually, although other people don't seem to like it so much, but I sort of specialize in this sort of stuff. Okay, so US Department of Justice issued a tender. We managed to find this tender request for a computer system. They were wanting to spend $1 to $2 million on it, whoever filled the tender. And the purpose of that computer system is to manage the documents for our prosecution. That came out last year. So I love these little trails that come out. But now, the DOJ just simply admits it. In relation to Sweden itself, that's a fascinating geopolitical story. The perception of Sweden and what has happened to Sweden since the assassination of Olof Palme, the then Prime Minister, in 1986. So Sweden has a neoconservative government since 2005. From even before 86, its shift into the arms of the United States was rapid. It is now in the position where it is the #1 per capita manufacturer of arms on the earth, having overtaken Israel a few years ago. It is the #1 exporter of arms in absolute terms to the United States during its forces are under US control in Afghanistan. It was the 5th into Libya. It sent its jet planes into Libya. 48% of the Gripen fighter jet is manufactured in US parts. There is a total integration of the Swedish arms manufacturing system and the United States arms manufacturing in terms of parts supply and so on. Who vetoed the EU having formal discussions about the National Security Agency with the United States? There were just 2 countries in the whole of the EU. Who were they? The UK and Sweden. We exposed the Swedish Foreign Minister Carl Bildt, who was formerly the Swedish Prime Minister, as being a US informant back since the 1970s. Back since the age of 23, he was inducted into the system. Barack Obama, after cancelling the visit to Russia and his summit with Putin over Snowden, where's he going instead? As a signal, he is going to Sweden. It's quite a sad thing what has happened to Sweden over that time. And concretely, in relation to, well, the London Independent diplomatic correspondent has reported as early as December 2010 that the US and Sweden were in discussions, informal discussions, about my onwards expedition from Sweden. Sweden has not resisted a single expedition to the United States since at least 2000. So it's not that I am scared of that, or I'm fearful of that, but my Swedish lawyers, my US lawyers and my British lawyers advise me don't do that. Also, it would not be possible for me to receive asylum in Sweden, because the Swedish government said that without charge it would hold me in incarceration. I can't walk into the embassy of a friendly country to prevent such an expedition. But my status here is that I was afforded asylum. I came here in relation to the United States. I was afforded asylum, for which I am grateful by the Ecuadorian people. And it was in relation to the US grand jury proceeding. 2 months investigation by the Ecuadorian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a formal declaration that my rights as a human being and publisher are threatened by that US investigation and by the failure of the British government or the Swedish government to give a guarantee that I would not be extradited to the United States for my publishing work.
Thank you. Could I call on Paul Monk, please, to ask our next question?
Julian, the film We Steal Secrets covers what has motivated you and where things have gone wrong for you. In what way, if any, is it misleading?
In what way, if any, is it not misleading, I guess would be the more interesting question. Let's try and pull back a bit. If you're in the public spotlight and you've got sort of a superpower you're in an adversarial relationship with, of course you get all sorts of attacks. This one, funded by Universal, and who directed the money to a filmmaker in New York, he's a very sort of New York guy. He took a particular approach. We believed that he would produce a pretty sleazy result. He did produce a pretty sleazy result. So we, as the whole organisation, decided to not engage with him. And this didn't improve his demeanour. He felt that it was a great privilege for any person to deal with Alex Gibney. We disagreed, and so there's a certain agenda in that film. You can search for Gibney transcript. Just search Gibney transcript or Gibney WikiLeaks transcript, and you will see we got hold of the transcript before the film was released. We analysed the whole thing line by line and put it out there. Now, it can be a bit tedious in parts, but it's pretty interesting. So, for example, I made some statement once to BBC. Well, what they say is blah, blah, blah. Gidney takes that, he chops off the, well, what they say, and he just has me saying that. And then chops it up further to, remove qualifiers and so on. That's done throughout the film for me, with me and other people. Perhaps the funniest sort of clearly intentional distortion is when I was a teenager, I had one of my handles was Wendaidi Mendax, okay? So I was a sort of intellectually pugnacious teenager and a bit of a show-off. And so, like many teenagers of that sort, I like to demonstrate, hey, I know a little bit of Latin. And I've got this cool joke. I'm going to have this as my, my online name. And what it means is nobly false. Because, hey, it's a pseudonym, right? Pseudonyms are false. So this is like a self-referential pseudonym describing how it's noble because it kind of protects you, but at the same time it's false, right? So that was when I was a teenager. Alex Sidney, 3 times during this film, tries to say that this is a reflection of my entire philosophy, including as an adult, and that somehow that this joke name as a teenager was a psychoanalysis 20 years ahead of its time, and that for me, the end justifies the means for any noble cause, especially lying.
Thank you. Sarah Reid, please. Sarah?
Good evening, Mr. Assange. This is a co-written question, so excuse the mic passing. Considering all the allegations and arguments that have been thrown against you for what you have done,
have your beliefs about WikiLeaks been shaken or changed at all since initially creating it? If so, or if not, why?
Yeah. Thanks. Well, I can't tell you what it's like to wake up to hear about how you've killed thousands of people or how you're a wanted violent rapist. To wake up in the morning to that on millions of different websites, you get a thick skin after a while. So I'm proud of having survived those assaults on my reputation. If we go and look at what do I think about WikiLeaks, I expected all those assaults, not those precise ones, but assaults like that. I expected that big fight. I like drama. I get bored without sufficient level of stimulus. So, I kind of like that thing. Perfectly prepared to have these big standoffs with the Pentagon or the U.S. government. I quite enjoy it. But if we go to did I reconsider my beliefs in WikiLeaks, and was I ever sort of despondent about that? There was only one moment. And that moment was fairly early on in our launch, where, for example, when we first released the main manual for Guantanamo Bay. Now, normally I write up our documents and give some explanation, a bit of analysis to encourage the uptake. For the main manual of Guantanamo Bay, I thought, great, this is easy. Guantanamo Bay is so newsworthy. This is the main manual for Guantanamo Bay. It's a really big scoop. We don't need to write that up. We can just put a 1-paragraph description and just put it out there. And then, of course, everyone's going to go bananas over the thing. That didn't happen. In fact, it wasn't until about a week and a half after. Gradually, it was reported on little blogs and started to be reported in the smaller magazines, and eventually got taken up by Wired magazine and then the New York Times. It eventually got there. But we had to to call a friend UPI, which is the newswire in the United States, to try and encourage an uptake. There was first early initial analysis. But where did that first early initial analysis come from? That was detailed and looked into these procedures, these abusive procedures that were committed against prisoners. They're called QRF procedures, where a whole bunch of guys smash the prisoners down with their riot shields on the ground and then tie them up and start to do what they call extraction. Well, it wasn't by investigative journalists. It certainly wasn't by these moralizing people from the liberal left who always can demonstrate how nice they are and how concerned they are with abuse. Not a single one of them did a damn thing. Well, a bondage and discipline club here in the UK wrote up the whole thing. A bondage and discipline club, how you could simulate the whole thing, like I'll be the guard, you be the prisoner, and we do our things and you tie each other up like this. I thought, this world, I just can't live in this world. This is just... Eventually I thought, okay, we just have to understand the economic flows for the media and how you strip supply to stimulate certain things and so on. And we did that. So we engineered our way out of the problem.
Next question is from Bridget Polish.
Hi, Julian. You've mostly covered my question, but maybe you could expand on it a little bit. How do you feel about the lives you've endangered, and will you ever take responsibility for those lives?
I take responsibility for every life that I haven't endangered. You know, in the Bradley Manning proceedings, General Carr, the person appointed by Barack Obama to head up the WikiLeaks task force. WikiLeaks task force in the Pentagon, we don't know how big it is now, that had 120 people, full-time, 7 days a week, FBI officers, DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, other people from the Pentagon, etc. The CIA admitted publicly that it also had a WikiLeaks task force. The FBI, the number of different agencies involved in the United States is over a dozen. It was a major thrust in the expenditure of resources against it. Anyway, General Carr, who was responsible for looking into the whole issue, including whether anyone was harmed, said under oath 2 months ago in the Bradley Manning proceedings that they could not find a single person who was, under oath. Similarly, and you go, oh, well, what about endangered? You know, some risks didn't eventuate. Well, NATO in Kabul, back in 2011, 2010, told CNN that they could not even find a single Afghan, and that's what the debate was about. They could not find a single Afghan who even needed to be moved, or, you know, to minimize the risk. So it's amazing to me, totally amazing, that those are the facts, that this organization, single person, its judgment has been correct, and yet, on the other hand, this accusation continues. And look at who it's coming from. We revealed that the United States had killed over 100,000 people in Iraq. Precise records between 2004 and 2009. The precise records down to 50 meters, where they were, the units involved, what happened, etc. Most importantly, we revealed that in Afghanistan, 20,000 people in that 5-month period, the US had records of their violent deaths that either it had caused or the border conflict had caused. We revealed that the United States, via the Pentagon and its military activities, was wading rivers deep in blood. To give you a comparison, it's estimated, I think it's a reasonable estimate, that 1 million people died in the Iraq War over a 10-year period. That is the equivalent to this entire lecture theatre every single day for 10 years. All of you dead every day for 10 years. That's the reality. And now, when you do a Google search for the phrase Pentagon, blood on hands, but no mention to WikiLeaks. What do you get? About 70,000 results. When you do a search for WikiLeaks blood on hands, how many results are there? 700,000. So in all the millions of deaths that the United States has been involved in through its armed forces back in post-World War II, conceptually, as far as the propaganda pushed out by the establishment press and its friends on the internet, conceptually, even though we have not harmed a single person, there is 10 times as much discussion about us as the Pentagon.
And for our final question this evening, can I call upon Emily Westmoreland, please?
Hi, Julian. What did you discuss in your hour-long conference with Lady Gaga?
Maybe we can discuss anything. Knowable five hours, so it's a lot of time for a discussion. But there is, now that you mention it, there is a play coming out in Melbourne at Mudfest on August the 23rd, which is Gaga versus Assange. There's a promo on YouTube. It looks, I would say, it looks tragically good, or you know, it's gone so bad, it's way back over the other side and back to good again, involving some Europop themed Gaga, me dissing Gaga. So I don't know, check it out.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed, everyone, for your questions, and thank you very much indeed, Mr. Julian Assange, for being a very engaging conversationalist this evening indeed. Can we give Julian Assange a round of applause?
Good evening, my name is Nick Langford. I'm the Executive Director of the Melbourne Globalist, and it's my great pleasure to thank Julian Assange and his trustees, I trust, for joining us live from the Ecuadorian Embassy in London tonight. I think it's a very good thing that we at the Melbourne Globalists are able to host events such as this as an outlet for student journalism, and to encourage greater transparency and accountability, frankness with the facts, if you will, from those organisations like WikiLeaks, who seek to do just that so controversially, it should be said, from government. I hope you all enjoyed tonight's Q&A session as much as I did. It's a Q&A session that the Melbourne Globalist couldn't have posted on its own. I'd like to echo Jake Rodrigo's thanks to RMIT University and its new BA program, and to Aidan Warren and our host this evening, Paul Baxby in particular. I'd also like to extend my own thanks to Maeve Lockman and Ryan Lim and the team from Left Right Think Tank for their tireless work and support, and also to my colleague Jacob Rodrigo and all the staff of Melbourne Globalist for the contribution they've made. Finally, thank you all for your attendance and your questions this evening. It's been a fascinating exchange, and I hope and encourage you to join us in continuing that dialogue online across Melbourne Globalist Facebook and Twitter pages, and of course our website, tmglobalist.org. That's if you can't join us straight after this very casual post-Julian Assange drinks at the Emerald Peacock on Lonsdale Street. Thank you once again.